I am so happy to be here today with you all at Brookings and to be surrounded by 3-4 generations of family. You'll get to meet them. My father-in-law is here, my mother, and of course, Theodore, my sister brother-in-law, and my cousin, 2 nieces. And out of the 3 young ones today, I guarantee you at least one, if not all, will end up doing something at Brookings, probably interning, and coming to Washington to serve in public service or some other area of life that perhaps will touch upon U.S.-Korea relations. So I am very glad to introduce them to Brookings and to Washington for their future and for our collective future as well. I'm a long-term thinking kind of gal. I'm not a short-term person. I think about the short term always in the context of the mid and long term. And I think those will be strengths I bring to Washington, since we all know Washington thinks mostly short term. It's inevitable. And I understand that. I've worked in government, in the State Department in the past to know that that is just the way it works. But our job here at Brookings is to do more than short-term thinking and short-term reacting. So I look forward to that challenge. I'm also very thrilled that my husband, Jeff Frankel, woke up at 5 in the morning today and tried 2 flights to get here. He is the best husband in the entire world, and if he didn't agree to my doing this job and support me so fully, well, we would have had some difficulties negotiating ourselves. And I'm really happy to see my dear old colleagues, and I mean old not by age, but people I've known since I was in my 20s, Victor Cha, Scott Snyder, James Pearson. Well, I'm a little older than you are, but Sheila Smith, I don't know if she's here, the senior Japan scholar from CFR. I see several of you out here whom I have worked with and grown up with in a sense. And so I feel I won't be alone, and that we in a way will have our own little think tank together and build a stronger team in Washington. Koreans and Korean Americans working on US relations with Korea, as well as Americans in the US, have tended to be out there on their own for decades and decades. And I think now Korean Americans and other Americans, we are all coming of age to be able to say we have the training, we have the expertise, we have the vision, and also mostly we want to serve. So I'm really glad to see you all out there. Jeff and I had lunch with Dr. Han just 2 weeks ago in Seoul. As Dr. Han mentioned in his video greeting, I have been working on US-Korea relations officially since I was 21 years old. As an undergrad at Smith College, I worked in the political section of the US Embassy in Seoul. I was then very excited to be in the midst of real-life politics as well as cocktail parties. They seemed very glamorous to me at that time, and then I grew up and realized it's all part of the job. It was 1985. 2 days after I began my post, drama unfolded on May 23rd. 73 college students broke into the U.S. Cultural Center and occupied the library. I witnessed, at the age of 21, firsthand, the dedication of the embassy staff to resolve the crisis in a peaceful and safe way. Round-the-clock negotiations, sleepless nights, and unceasing determination to hear out the students and their passion for democracy, as well as to maintain stability between Seoul and Washington, D.C. Kathy Stevens, now former ambassador to South Korea, and Ed Dong, currently minister counselor at the embassy in Seoul, were part of that hardworking team. They were awfully young. They are now leaders in the US-South Korea foreign policy field, and I feel privileged to have known them for close to 30 years. That was my initiation into foreign policy and diplomacy. 30 years later, here I am at Brookings, embarking on a great adventure. In the months I have been working with my Brookings colleagues, I have come to realize that this is my dream job. I truly feel that this job was made for me and that I was made for it. Both Brookings and I take seriously scholarly depth and integrity, and we work with the conviction that good scholarship can educate the larger public and accurately inform policy. I plan to focus my initial work on three main areas. Again, initial work. There'll be many other things to do. 1, issues of democracy in Korea. 2, a more global approach to North Korea. And 3, a broadening of the US-ROK alliance. Today, the Republic of Korea boasts a dynamic democracy, per capita income rivaling many European countries, leadership in telecommunications, of course, hot cultural exports, and a green growth strategy to which both the government and many in the private sector are committed. A film industry that enjoys international acclaim and world-class divas who perform at grand opera houses around the world. Students who rank at the top of international test scores, and the largest number of international students per capita in the United States, particularly in graduate studies. We all know Koreans are world famous for working hard, but they also play hard. Singing and dancing, and Strobe already gave us an intimation of that at ASEAN. I cannot imagine Dr. Han Sung-ju singing and dancing. It is just not, it is beyond my imagination, and I have a pretty good imagination. Nevertheless, he is Korean, so I guess he had to sing and dance, because doing so, it's practically part of the Korean DNA. And I am no exception. I once wanted to be a Broadway star when I was in high school. My parents quickly disabused me of that idea. Although I am a San Francisco native, I spent my early childhood in the 1960s in the home of my maternal grandparents, for which I will be eternally grateful, in perpetuity. I was a physical appendage to my grandmother, Kim Ye-yang, when she went to the Korean mountains and stream sides to picnic with her friends. They played hwato, Korean cards, and danced to the throbbing beat of jango, the hourglass drum. I so appreciated the heart-throbbing beat of traditional Korean music and the wisdom of simply enjoying life, even through the very hard times that her generation lived through. The Japanese colonial rule, Korean War, the beginnings of industrialization. It was a tough time. But they laughed and they danced and they sang. Korea is probably the only society where tone-deaf people go to schools and pay a lot of money to have buckets put over their heads in order to learn how to sing. Of course, many of you here are experts in dancing the Gangnam style. What you may not know is that in Poland in 2012, beauty contestants for Miss Poland had to perform Gangnam style on stage in bikinis. If you're curious, look it up on Google image. It is hilarious, strange, and also really interesting. What you also may not know is that K-pop and the Korean wave are of course pervasive around the world, but that recently Thailand created an entire Thai drama about watching Korean dramas. Do you understand? It's meta drama. Okay? My friend David Kong, whom I really wish, and I know Victor would join us here, but is in happy Southern California, he gave me that little tidbit to throw into my address and to entertain you with. Even Egypt holds K-pop competitions. A teenager named Eman Badr one in 2011. Egyptian newspapers noted that she is, quote, self-taught in Korean reading, writing, and speaking. This is Egypt. And dreams of one day living in South Korea. This is Korean soft power at work and a Korean dream spreading globally. But the reality of the Korean dream, like the counterpart in America, is challenging. Disappointment is part of the challenge. Thousands of defectors and refugees from the DPRK enjoy legal citizenship south of the 38th parallel. A few among them have become leaders in the ROK government, and one among them among more than 25,000 defectors is in the National Assembly as of 2013. But most experience discrimination and dislocation in their adopted country. How will this group of marginalized Koreans develop a national identity that aligns with the domestic and foreign policies of the Republic of Korea? Right now, most defectors tend to vote conservatively and oppose the DPRK regime. But will that continue? How these, quote, new Koreans, unquote, regard the United States and the alliance over time, perhaps as a hindrance to reunification, or as inadequately dealing with Pyongyang, or something else, we do not know. In the mid to long term, their minority status will compel them to force changes in Korean democracy. And I'm studying this right now. If they remain on the margins of society, what kinds of interpreters of democracy might they become to their kin and colleagues in the North, especially if and when reunification begins? Defectors already have become vocal demanders of human rights protection for North Koreans in China. And Korean legislators have added their support. Americans have provided funding and training for defector groups. When Pyongyang protests balloon launches that rain down propaganda and transistor radios in North Korea, not only the defectors, but Americans too get implicated. Such new actors complicate the US peninsular relationship. Can our respective democracies be flexible to accommodate new actors and new issues? What kinds of challenges and opportunities will new demographic factors present to the US-Korea relationship? And while Koreans protest China's unjust treatment of North Korean border crossers, tens of thousands of Chinese cross into Korea to earn higher wages and develop skills. They are joined by tens of thousands of other foreign nationals from the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Mongolia, Pakistan, Nepal, to name just several. And they are not necessarily temporary migrants. Many are the spouses, mostly wives, of Koreans. They become naturalized as ROK citizens and rear children who are bi or even multiracial and cultural, and they are fully Korean, the children. They speak perfect Korean. When you hear them, they sound Korean. When you look at them, they are new Koreans, a different sort. Estimates show that by 2020, these new Koreans will exceed 1.5 million in a population of 50 million, in addition to over 1 million foreign nationals working in Korea today. By 2030, immigrants could make up more than 6%, and by 2050, about 10% of the entire population in South Korea. This is brand new territory for a nation with a self-identity as 단일 민족, one ethnicity, one heritage, one people. The need for foreign labor and for human reproduction is critical in a country with the lowest birth rate in the world excepting only Singapore, and with one of the fastest aging populations. By 2050, the elderly will comprise 40% of the population. Each will depend on 2 young people to support them economically. Compare that with 2010, just a few years ago, when about 15 young people were working to support each of the elderly. The working age population will peak in 2016. We're very close to it. In 2050, 5.5% of GDP will go to pensions, while the growth rate is expected to plummet dramatically. We know that elderly populations tend to be politically and economically conservative. What might be the implications for Korea's foreign policy and specifically US-Korea relations? How can and will the new Koreans participate in democratic life? This includes the question what foreign policy preferences they will espouse, and how willing and able would elderly and hyphenated Koreans be to support government assistance to refugees and potentially millions of refugees should there be a crisis along the border on the peninsula, or reconciliation or reunification that cannot be managed? How willing and able would they be to calculate their individual and family budgets and needs in contrast to the need to support for increased burden sharing in the alliance with the US? As students of democracies, we have to study the obvious and not so obvious manifestations of these and other societal changes. Although strategic alliances are rooted in geopolitics, they cannot endure and thrive unless domestic publics support them. Koreans and Americans need to invest in domestic assets that tie the two peoples together: democratic values and governance, aspirational norms that include equality in gender, ethnicity, and class, and non-discrimination, as well as people-to-people diplomacy among various professions, age groups, and of course, issue areas. In order to make bilateral relations even more productive, the US and Korea also need to think and act globally together. In the 2000s, with the rise of China and the economic decline of Japan, regional changes became more important in calculating the purpose and capabilities of the alliance. The Iraq and Afghanistan wars showed how the alliance and the military preparedness of both countries needed to be more globally connected. In the current decade, an increased focus on and expansion of US military strategy and assets, called reposturing, touches the security and politics of numerous nations in the Asia-Pacific. I'm glad that Dean Harding is with us today. I originally entered my PhD studies to specialize in Chinese politics. And I want you to know this, when I was in college from 1982 to 86, I could not study Korea. There was no Korean language to learn, although I'm very much self-taught in my Korean, and also my parents. They pressed me and forced me. We had nothing on Korea to study in the 1980s. So the best we could do was study Chinese politics and Japanese politics. And so I am an East Asianist by training with a focus on Korea. And I studied Professor Harding's work when I was in college and graduate school. I thought he was a really old man because he had written so much until I actually met him 10 years ago and realized he's not an old man at all. But to let you know, I benefited a lot from those studies, and they did not go to waste. My past in Chinese studies, Japanese studies, both languages and the substance, will come in handy in my work at Brookings. Today, we all think about China. With respect to North Korea, China's focus on domestic stability, its own domestic stability, and allegiance to its treaty obligations to Pyongyang make Beijing, in my opinion, an unlikely candidate to lead the way in opening up the North. The US and the ROK have been, again in my opinion, too dependent on China, with few constructive outcomes to show for their hopes and expectations. We, of course, need to maintain good working partnership with China and Japan, but we need to learn from those who actually have been able to make peace and diplomatic headway with Pyongyang: Europe, Australia, Canada, Southeast Asia, South America. At least 45 European countries, as well as the European Union, have diplomatic ties with North Korea, including those allies who are very close to the United States: the UK, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, Turkey. To the south, Brazil, Mexico, and over 20 Latin American countries engage the DPRK. In Asia, almost all the members of ASEAN work with North Korea legally and with established protocol. When I was in the North last summer on a research trip with academics from the United States and Canada, I was startled to see cans of Coca-Cola at restaurants in Pyongyang. I studied one can like it was some strange artifact, looked at it, observed it, and I found www.coca-cola.it. Italy buys Coke from the US and then sells it to North Korea. Is the US really free of trade with the DPRK? Officially, yes. But North Koreans drink American Coca-Cola, which is a prized, expensive drink, by the way. Malaysian fruit drinks flood the North Korean market, and Mongolians, whose economy is fast-growing, work with North Koreans on mining technology, tourism, and other enterprises. North Korea is not as isolated as some might want it to be, and frankly, other countries are securing their market share with a long-term view in mind. President Park Geun-hye has already moved to connect the ROK's economic and geopolitical interests with Europe and with Southeast Asia. The VIP policy, reaching out to Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, you get it, VIP, okay, is a significant start. Increasingly, Korea's global reach extends farther and farther in geography and issues. In 2010, it became the first non-G7 country to host a summit meeting of the G20 countries. One of the most substantive accomplishments at that meeting was the plan for IMF reform, particularly an expansion of quotas and reallocation away from overrepresented European countries to underrepresented Asian countries. Many nations host these meetings. Very few are able to get an issue on the table and move it forward. It happened in Korea. This was a big leap forward in influencing global governance. Last, Korea's Miracle on the Han, which we all know about, extends to the environment and offers lessons for multilateral cooperation. As in many other rapidly developing countries, Korea's air and water pollution had risen intolerably with rapid industrialization. But in the 1990s, by which time income had reached the threshold of about 7 million won per capita, and democracy had taken place, Korea raced back down the far side of the environmental Kuznets curve. Sulfur dioxide concentrations in Seoul peaked in 1991, but fell 85% by 1997. 6 years. It's a very short time. These days, air in Korea is again turning brown. We were just there. We experienced it. And it is because partly as a result of the pollution blowing across the Yellow Sea from China, thus embodying the transborder phase of environmental issues. When dealing with the global commons, national efforts have limits. Therefore, Korea's leadership on the environment is most welcome. Hopefully, the United States will follow suit. In closing, the US-ROK alliance is bilateral, of course, but the way the world works is multilateral and global. The US and Korea must find ways to expand common interests to make them globally more relevant. I want to thank our generous donors to the new Korea Chair. As you have heard from me, I am a living example, as is Victor, Scott, and all the others here who didn't have the opportunity to learn about Korea in our undergraduate days. We are now able to help provide that education to others and to the public in general. And we are very grateful to you all for making that possible. I also want to thank the Brookings Board and Strobe for prioritizing Korea studies. I have been trying to build Korea studies on my own at various institutions. And everybody says, oh, funding is the key, but funding is not the key. Institutional will is the key. Without institutional will, you can have as much funding offers as possible, but if an institution chooses not to prioritize a particular country, region, or issues, no matter how much money is spent, it just won't get done. So Strobe and the board, thank you very, very much. To Richard Bush and Kevin Scott for their ceaseless support and care. I feel so much a part of this family at the CEAP already. I can't tell you how I look forward to joining the larger family there come June, July. And all those at Brookings who are working behind the scenes to make today and the study of Korea a success, I thank you. I also want to thank some of my former Wellesley students that I have caught the image of out there in the audience. I am grateful. Teaching at Wellesley has been and is a tremendous joy, one of the most rewarding things one can do in life, to educate young people. And I'm happy to say many of them are Washington, in the State Department, in Congress, and they will keep going on. Most of all, I want to thank my late father, Douglas Kwang-hwan Moon, for having encouraged me to serve as a human bridge between the United States and Korea since I was a small child. He taught me this every single day, that this was my duty and mission in life. And for having instilled in me the greatest good, the importance of education and public service. Thank you very much.